Hi, Chris Williamson. Hi, Tom. Welcome to 10 by 6.
Thanks very much. Good to be here.
Yeah, this is your second visit, so it's a privilege to our end as well. We're focusing on this particular session on the decision by Resist, the party which you initially set up with others, to now be formalized, become a political party based on the democratic mandate of its members. So all we're going to focus on today, Chris, is for you just to explain what Resist is, why Resist, and then we're going to focus on some of your initial policy outlines, which you published in a press release, which also I published last week, and then some of the questions that have arisen since, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, cool.
Fantastic. So we kick off with, what is Resist?
Well, I think we wanted to capture the spirit of the Corbyn project, the Corbyn movement. Obviously, Jeremy Corbyn awakened a latent support for socialism in the country. A lot of people thought socialism was dead and buried. Regrettably, the Corbyn project has been utterly destroyed inside the Labour Party now. I don't think there's any future for socialists inside the Labour Party, but those people haven't disappeared. And so I think what we initially felt was it was important to try and create some sort of home for people to come to, and to try and ensure that we can build on that enthusiasm, that energy that Jeremy brought out, with a view to obviously resisting the direction of travel that the country has been taking, certainly for the last 10 years, but actually for a lot longer than that, really. And I'm talking about the neoliberal trajectory. And there is such a lot to resist now in the country in terms of the changes that should be enforced through in regards to the health service, for example, the impact on public services, the number of people that are forced into precarious employment, the millions of people that are living in poverty, the homelessness crisis that we have in the country. And I think what we're hoping is that we can bring people together, and I suppose the USP of the Resist movement is that we want to bring the left together, bring the socialist groups and political parties together in order to ensure that we can maximize our effectiveness. Because I think unless we can actually start working collaboratively together, unless we can start talking together on the left, we've got no chance of actually making a difference and making an inroads into the wider community. And I think that's really crucial, that we therefore do find ways of working together in order to raise political consciousness and raise political expectations in the country. And I think if we can do that, then I think there's a very real chance that we can make a difference.
Fantastic. Tom?
That's great. And, it's obviously terrific to be giving voters more choice and actually a real choice when it comes to policies that will help them, help people and families, workers, as a change to, as an alternative to what's being offered by some of the other major parties. What's your view about in how many? I know it's early days, Chris, and the membership have only just voted to become a political party that will stand in elections. But what's your view about how many constituencies you would aim to have Resist candidates in, and will you work alongside other left-wing groups to maybe promote the best socialist candidate in each constituency?
Well, that's absolutely crucial. I mean, it's not about our way or the highway. I mean, there was different views about whether or not we should become a political party or not, but the members have overwhelmingly voted that that's the direction of travel we should take. And we've said that we want to be a member-led organisation. But it's absolutely essential, really, that we do work together with other political parties on the left, because we're just not going to make any inroads at all if we actually start fighting against each other. We already have a seat, for example, on the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition Steering Committee, and we intend to continue to retain that seat. And we want to work together with all those, as I've already said, all those political parties and those groups. So I guess what we'll be looking to ensure is that we've got a candidate, whether it be a Resist or whatever name the political party that we become actually takes, whether it be a Resist candidate or a Socialist Party candidate or a Workers' Party candidate. I think we need to find that sort of electoral pact, if you like, so that we can make sure that we're certainly not campaigning against each other, standing against each other. But the other important thing I would say, Tom, is that it's not just about electoral politics. We've made that mistake in this country, I think, that politics is seen through the prism of Parliament or the town hall. And whilst they obviously have a very important role to play, politics should be, and is indeed, much more than that, because most of the power in this country isn't wielded actually by politicians in town halls and in Parliament. It's wielded by the big corporations. And therefore, I think it's essential that we encourage people to not just put their faith in elected representatives. Representative democracy isn't working. The people that we have representing us actually don't represent us. They represent powerful corporate vested interests in this country. And I think it's about raising people's political consciousness about that. And let's also remember, when we're talking about electoral politics, that the biggest cohort in every election are the non-voters. And I used to say, even when I was a member of the Labour Party, even before Jeremy came on the scene, that we need to find ways of mobilising people, of encouraging people that don't vote to actually turn out and vote, give people a reason to vote, as it were. And I think if you do that, people will turn out and vote. People don't vote, I think, because they're pissed off with the electoral system and they don't feel that, politics actually is working in their interests. And they're right to feel that way, because it isn't actually, by and large. If it was, in the fifth biggest economy in the world, we wouldn't have the level of poverty and deprivation and inequality that we now have. So I think this is twofold, really. We've got to collaborate with other political parties. We've got to bring, in my view, various pressure groups together to work together. And we've got to ensure that we're not just going down the cul-de-sac of electoral politics. Yes, that's important. Yes, it's important that we have candidates standing, but it's much more than that. As I say, it's about raising political consciousness, raising political expectations, and, if you like, empowering and politicizing the wider general public. Look, the establishment want this, want to keep people, feeling that there's nothing that can be done, that politics is a waste of time. They want to keep people, as it were, in ignorance, as it were, because that enables the status quo to prevail. And they do very well out of that status quo. And our job, our challenge, if you like, is to challenge that status quo.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. Just a quick thing, you mentioned there the name of Resist and indicated that's open to change in future. And is that in your mind that it could be called something else at a later stage?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the feedback that we've had so far from members is that, some members like the name Resist. And then, when we first established, it was the idea was to try and create a social movement to resist, as I've said, the kind of neoliberal trajectory of the country. Whether that's the right name for a political party or not, the feedback from a lot of members is, well, Resist is kind of a sort of slightly negative connotation in a sense, and it might be better to have something which is a more kind of positive name. So various ideas have been put forward, the Socialist People's Party, or indeed just the People's Party, Eco-Socialist Party, because as you'll have seen from our 10 sort of key core policies, addressing the potential climate catastrophe is absolutely a top priority. And bringing those two things together. I mean, I remember, 20, 30, 40 years ago, probably, where, we were talking about, from red to green, the bottom line is change. And I remember that sort of wonderful strap line, which never really went anywhere. And it was started to be brought in, I think, under Jeremy Corbyn with the Labour Party. But I think there's more that the Labour Party should have done then. And certainly now the Labour Party, and no political party, frankly, is really taking the whole issue of possible climate catastrophe seriously enough. And let's be clear, we're not going to address the potential climate catastrophe through capitalism. Capitalism is the cause of the climate catastrophe. It's only a socialist solution, in my view, that will save humanity from potential environmental cataclysm.
Does that include, Chris, I know this is going back to the arguments and the debates that Lenin had in his youth and as he was growing up, but does that mean also challenging the whole idea of industrialization as well as capitalism, bearing in mind that the climate scientists have identified that it was the beginning of industrialization that we started to see a very, very strong upward curve in relation to climate change?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to look at all of that, and I think we need to embrace, new technological solutions. I think there are technological ideas that can be embraced that we can utilize in order to, avert the potential climate catastrophe, as it's often been referred to, further down the track. But I think it's also things like, in terms of adaptation to climate change, not just simply building higher and higher flood defences. There's only so high you can build walls, in my opinion. It's like changing our agricultural practices, reforesting the uplands, and we've made that a very clear statement in our 10 core policies, that these are the areas that we do need to look at, and that actually will generate a lot of employment for people as well. And I remember reading about John Maynard Keynes nearly 100 years ago saying that his grandchildren, i.e. our generation, will only be working 15 hours a week. Well, we certainly need to be, in my view, minimizing the amount of time that people have to go to work, and actually enabling people to grow as human beings, enabling communities to grow and interact with each other. And that means, therefore, a lot more investment in public services, a lot more investment in education. It means investing in green technologies and different agricultural practices, as I've already mentioned. And I think, if we can do those things, then there's no reason why people's living standards, and we're not saying people have to go around wearing a hair shirt, but look, there's enough resources, I think, for us all to go around. If we adapt to, the way in which we use the Earth's resources effectively, then I think we can maintain a decent and good quality standard of living for everyone. It's just that it's a very unequal world, isn't it? And the resources are being used in an unequal way to benefit the super rich and the major corporations. And that's something I think that we need to challenge. But it's no good us just challenging it as politically motivated people. I think our first step is, as I've said, getting collaboration amongst politically active people. The key question, though, is, and the key challenge for us is mobilizing people and raising political consciousness of the wider general public. That's the only way, in my view, to really make a difference, and to just invoke the lines of the Shelley poem, the Mask of Vanity, we are many, they are few. And we need to, I think, give people the confidence that through standing in solidarity, they are powerful and that a difference can be made. A lot of people just feel that there's nothing that can be done. And obviously the establishment want people to feel that way, because they quite like the status quo as it currently is constituted. And the challenge for us is to give people the confidence that they can make a difference by standing together.
And Chris, thanks for that. Can I just ask you a question about the media? It's a question that you'll be very aware of and have talked at great length about, but I just wanted to sort of ask you this question. So what you've already created through Resist is an opportunity for a bottom-up approach that's truly democratic, where the members themselves, take part in discussion, debates, then vote and create the party's manifesto, if you like, and the 10 areas that you've identified really is a people's manifesto, I'd suggest. Now, at the last election, there was, this independent research that showed that people, when they were shown the manifestos of the major parties, including the Labour under Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party manifesto, when they were shown those different manifestos but not told which parties they belong to, people were generally much more in favour of Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party manifesto than that of any other major party. But of course, then the media tell everyone that those policies are economically impossible or too expensive or outrageous or communist or whatever they taint it with, and people don't vote for the things that are actually good for them. So how do you counter that? How do you counter this massive media bias? What are you looking to do in future to create more sort of a fairer media environment for us all to exist in?
Well, I think we already started to counter it when Jeremy was leader first time around, and in the run into the 2017 election, everybody wrote the Labour Party off, wrote Jeremy Corbyn off, and yet we got the biggest increase in vote share since 1945. And that was, I think, a combination really of using independent media like yourselves, using social media, although the algorithms have been manipulated somewhat since then, so that's made it more tricky. But I think that building of a mass movement and that buzz that was created on the street, I think, did actually make a a huge difference. But the thing I think that really frightened the horses in terms of the establishment, or one of the things anyway, that frightened the establishment was Jeremy's proposal to democratise the media, make it more properly accountable. That's absolutely got to be a priority, I think, for us. But I don't think the media, the mainstream, the corporate media, if I can put it like that, are as influential as they once were. They are still very influential, of course they are, and we shouldn't underestimate that, but they're not as influential as they used to be. And I think the independent media can only grow, but I do think we need to look at different platforms as well, because we know, as I've already said, they are sort of seeking to clamp down on messages which are, you know, uncomfortable truths for the establishment, as it were. But I think that's the route. You know, obviously, what you're doing, and we've created a weekly live stream, Resistance TV. I mean, it's still a very small acorn at the moment, but lots of these acorns are being planted all over the place. Some are beginning to flourish more than others. I mean, the Canary is a good example that's getting quite a significant penetration. But as I keep saying, our plan is to plant lots of acorns all over the country, really, with a view to not just growing one or two giant oak trees, from which obviously little acorns do grow. We want to create a forest of oak trees all over the country. And I think, you know, the more that we can use independent media, the more that we can, you know, the traditional ways of communicating with people on a face-to-face basis, if we can create that buzz, if we can give people knowledge, because knowledge is power, isn't it? You know, and there's lots that can be done, even at a local level right now, lots of things that local authorities, for example, could be doing in terms of addressing the cuts, addressing the housing crisis within the law, not about setting illegal budgets or anything like that. There are ways and means of doing that. One of the things that we're intending to do in the new year is to embark upon a nationwide tour to really test the water, to see what support there is for the potential for a new political force in the country. But also, as I've said, to start this process, this discussion, to raise political consciousness, because in the end, what if we can, you know, give people that information, give people that power of knowledge, they can then go to their local authority, for example, to say, well, why are you dealing with the housing crisis? Why have we got people sleeping on the street in our borough? You know, why are people waiting for years for a council house when you could actually have the powers now to not just build council houses, but to simply just go out and acquire them, as they used to happen in the 1970s under the municipalisation programme? That's possible now. Not they're not doing it, but they could be doing it, and they could be therefore be providing a much lower cost alternative to the rip-off private rented sector, which we know was deregulated in 1989, the Housing Act. And there was a lot of opposition from the Labour parliamentarians at the time, but it never translated into a manifesto commitment in the subsequent 1992 election, or any other election for that matter, until Jeremy Corbyn came along. That was the first time we ever gave any hope to private renters in the country in that sense. So I think, you know, the things like that can be done, but it comes back as again to trying to ensure that we can get political groups, political parties on the left outside the Labour Party, maybe some people associated with the Labour Party even still, although why anybody wants to be associated with that, what would I call it, a shit show of a party, is beyond me, frankly, nowadays. But now we know what we know and the direction of travel that they are taking. But, you know, there are still a lot of good people who are associated with that. But I think we all need to be, you know, working together with a view to empowering the wider general public. Because I think it was Nye Bevan who once said, look, the purpose of getting power is to give it away. And that's really what would frighten the establishment, and would change the course of history. And it was the 1974 Labour Party manifesto where there was a clear commitment to a irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power. That was 1974. A lot of people talked about, indeed I talked about the 2017 manifesto as being the best manifesto, really probably since 1945. But actually, I think that 1974 Labour manifesto was a better commitment. And, you know, 2017, of course, manifesto was radical in the context of where we've been for the last 4 decades. But that alternative economic strategy that the Labour government was implementing from 74 to 76 was basically thrown in the bin by Dennis Healey and Jim Callaghan. I mean, Healey went to the International Monetary Fund on a false premise that Britain was running out of money, which is impossible when you have your own sovereign fiat currency, which we haven't been on, you know, the Bretton Woods agreement that used to limit the ability of governments to intervene in the economy and so on. And that was scrapped in 1971 by Richard Nixon. So, you know, there was no basis for that. And, you know, they were the first monetarist government, actually. You know, they were the nursemaids, they were the midwives to the neoliberal
Yes.
nightmare that we've been living with ever since.
Yes, absolutely. Brilliant, Chris. Thank you so much. Can I bring you just on to, you've covered a lot of your commitments, it has to be said, in the narrative so far. If I can just bring you on to some of the main points that you've identified initially for the party to be focused on electorally. If we go to the economy, if I can just briefly read out, utilize powers available to a currency issuing nation to create a strong economy that works in the interest of the many, not the few. Introduce a generally progressive tax system, introduce a job guarantee scheme, standardized to a 4-day week, which you talked about in terms of, you know, going back to the Keynes quote, raise the minimum wage to a genuine living wage, make trade union representation a right in all workplaces, and repeal anti-trade union laws. Without going into much detail, how is the modern monetary theory shaping that?
Oh, it's very much informing it.
Yes.
I think we need to have a better understanding really of how the monetary system operates. And it was Henry Ford who once said that if the people understood how the monetary and banking system operated, there would be a revolution by tomorrow morning. Our job is to create that revolution. I think, as I say, having our own sovereign currency, being a currency issuing nation, does give us an enormous flexibility. And I think having an understanding that money is no object, that the only barriers, frankly, to public investment, well, one is political will, of course, but in terms of avoiding, inflationary pressures and things like that, it's the capacity of the economy to absorb that public spending, as it were. And there are ways and means of addressing that. I mean, we're nowhere near at full capacity in this country at the moment in terms of the economy. We've got, millions of people unemployed and underemployed. And we also have a massive shortfall in terms of public service provision, in terms of infrastructure, which isn't fit for a purpose. And I think we need to be looking at how we can match that. And also in relation to things like the Green New Deal that we talked about and the potential for reforesting the uplands and so on. I mean, if we were to bring all these things in, as it were, then we could certainly do that using a kind of an understanding, using modern monetary theory as a lens, if you like, to understand how the monetary system operates, and recognizing that the deficit, the fiscal deficit, is not a problem, frankly. The real issue, the real deficits which are problematic, of course, is the deficit in healthcare, which we now have. The deficit in terms of inequality in this country. The deficit in relation to the climate. Clearly, these are areas that we need to be mindful of. But and I think we need taxation, of course. I mean, taxation is required to generate a value for the currency, of course, because corporations, as individuals, we have a tax liability. Well, this worthless bit of paper, the pound currency, as it were, the pound sterling, it only generates a value because there is, you have to pay your tax liabilities in it. So that's the first thing, really. But we also need taxation to address inequality, to tackle the grotesque levels of inequality and the power that goes with that. With people have, super rich, have enormous power in this country, and we can redress that to some extent, I think, through the taxation system. And of course, we can use it to drive behavior change, to promote, environmentally friendly, economic activity and purchases, green vehicles and this sort of thing and so on. But also where the economy starts to, heat up a bit and you start to get up to a situation where it is at full capacity, well, you can then use the taxation system to create space for public spending if there are public programs that you want to invest in as an interventionist, progressive socialist government in that sense. So, for me, I think having an understanding of the monetary system and to actually start to, again, alert people to the fact that they've had the wool pulled over their eyes for forever, really. Lots of people think, oh, well, maybe we needed a bit of austerity. And you've got even the Labour Party. I mean, there was a big debate when I was first elected in 2010 about whether we should apologise, the Labour Party should apologise for spending too much. It's absolutely absurd. They didn't spend enough, never mind about not too much. The issue was how they organised the economy. They didn't bring the utilities, for example, under public control and all this. And for anybody that's worried, about the, run on the pound and all the rest of it, well, there are various mechanisms, various levers available to a government where you can lock funds, behind capital controls. Iceland did it when, in the aftermath of the crash. I mean, there was an attempt to, to do their economy down, do their currency down, and they just sort of locked out the speculators and the SPIDs. They couldn't move their money out. Well, if they can do it in Iceland, Christ, we can do it here. It's just about political will in the end. And I think, alerting people to some of these concepts, I think, is really important, because I think a lot of politicians are ignorant about this as well, I've got to say. And so this is very much part of this process of political consciousness raising. And, not just leaving it to the politicians and the politicos, but actually alerting people. So it's, it's coming from the bottom up. So people are saying, we're not accepting these excuses that you're giving for cuts. They're not necessary. These are political choices, and this is how you can do it.
Is there a space then, Chris, for maximum and minimum pay to be brought in through a legislative route, so that therefore,
well, I think so.
Yeah, the parameters become so much more narrow as opposed to what they currently are.
I mean, again, talking about Jeremy, there's a lot of good things that Jeremy did. I mean, we owe big gratitude to Jeremy for kind of, I suppose, waking that sleeping giant, and rehabilitating, socialism in that sense, because it had been, seen as a dirty word for far too long. And what we realised was there's massive support for it. But yeah, I mean, and indeed in the manifesto that Labour were putting forward, there was talk about a sort of a maximum, a ceiling on certainly on public contracts anyway, where any contract that was let to a private company, that there would be a kind of an income ratio, as it were. Well, I mean, we'd like to see a situation where, we're addressing that across the board, really, and would like to see more worker cooperatives. And again, there was a real commitment there for worker cooperatives in the manifesto, and the right to own, and companies that were being, flogged off, hedge funds coming in and asset stripping. There was a commitment in there to enable the companies, the workforce, should I say, to buy out those companies. I would have gone further, actually, was arguing for us to go further, to say, where a company is looking to offshore its operations overseas, we'll say, well, hold on, before you do that, you're going to give the workers the right to buy that company out and create a worker cooperative. And, worker cooperatives are, can be incredibly successful, both in terms of, addressing those kind of issues of inequality, but just, commercially, they can be very successful. Mondragon in Spain, which was started, I think, in the aftermath of the kind of, the Franco era. I think it's one of the biggest corporations operating in Spain now. I mean, and they're incredibly successful, but they have an income ratio there. I think the lowest paid to the highest paid, it's something like 3 or 4 or 5 to 1. I can't remember the precise, but it's nothing like, compared to where we have in this country, where in some of these big corporations, the lowest paid workers to the highest paid workers, I mean, the ratio is something like 2, 3, 4, 500 to 1. I mean, it's absolutely obscene. And this has been a massive change, really, since Dennis Healey went to the IMF, as I say, but particularly when Thatcher came in, we saw how the inequality grew exponentially and continued to grow under New Labour as well. Let's remember that.
Can I just, we're running out of time, so if we can ask for some sort of zappy responses. On number 8, we talk about national security program for a safer and peaceful world. But the problem that we obviously have is that one of the biggest employers, and certainly the most profitable, is the arms industry, who the last thing they want is a safer and peaceful world. It's simply not on their raison d'etre. How then do we seek globally to take on board something so powerful? Just very quickly, if you've got any initial ideas of how the arms industry can be reduced to being much more benign.
Well, I mean, I think the Lucas plan that was drawn up by the workers at Lucas in 1976 gave us the clue, and that is diversification. And let's also remember, yes, it's true that the defence industry is a big employer, but it's in terms of the decline in terms of the number of people that work in the arms industry. The number of people that worked on armaments, on military, creating weapons of war in this country has diminished by 2/3 over the last sort of 30, 40 years. I think there's 400,000 people worked in the industry in 1981. And when I last looked at the figures, which I think was a couple of so years back, might have been 3 years ago now, it was down to about 140, 150,000. So there's been a massive reduction. And therefore, I think what we need to do is move away from military investment, not only because it isn't actually generating the jobs that it once did, but obviously it's dependent upon, death and destruction and chaos around the world. And I think, one of the things that again, going back to Jeremy Corbyn, he appointed a Minister for Peace and Disarmament. And I think using the position on the UN Security Council, whatever you think about that, but there's a permanent seat on the UN Security Council to promote peace and disarmament, I think would be an enormous gesture, and one that would, I think, inspire others around the world to follow suit. I mean, it was such a disappointment because there's so many people, not just in this country, I think, but across the world, were looking to the Corbyn experiment with a view to potentially replicating it in their own country. And the fact that it was defeated, I think, it was not just a great disappointment here, it was a massive blow around the world. But we've got to dust ourselves off. We can't just give up. We've got to dust ourselves down and carry on. And as I say, if we can mobilize people, as we've talked about, things can change quite quickly. It's just about giving people confidence, I think, and knowledge, as I keep saying, knowledge is power.
Would the new party be prepared to cut off at least trade relations, if not diplomatic relations, with those countries that create genocide, create apartheids?
Well, I think we absolutely must do.
Yeah.
We absolutely must do that. I mean, and we're very clear that as a movement, as a party, we want to be an internationalist party, an anti-imperialist party, and we need to recognize the struggles of liberation movements around the world are our struggles. And the people that they are struggling against are very often the very self-same sort of, corporations that are creating havoc in this country too. And I think making those connections, making those links is really important. I think we would certainly look to be, well, I would like to see us breaking off diplomatic relations with the likes of Saudi Arabia, with Israel, because, these countries, I mean, they're rogue states. It's outrageous. I mean, people, some of these people in Parliament talk about, it's not in the national interest. Well, I disagree. It's not in our interest, frankly, to continue to prop up these sorts of repressive regimes, because in the end it ends up coming back to bite us. I mean, we know that some of the technologies that, for example, Israel have been perfecting and using against the Palestinian people, then actually used against our populations here and so on. So we need to, I think, make that connection. We need to obviously talk about the situation here in Britain, but we need to be looking around the world and uniting, the old kind of Marxist sort of philosophy of the workers of the world unite. We absolutely need to do that. We really do.
But Tom, I'll come to you in a second. That's okay. Just two quick questions from the viewpoint of those people on social media and how they've responded to the press release. Very, very quick. The overarching one, of course, is the Labour voters that say that if we break up and start voting for other left-wing parties, what will happen is we're doomed to have the Conservative Party, well, not forever, but forever in the language that they use. What would be a very sort of quick affirmative response to those people?
We're doomed either way. I mean, because at the end of the day, the Labour Party is the flip side of the Conservative coin, the Conservative neoliberal coin. They will tinker at the edges, but they won't make fundamental change. And to be honest with you, the Labour Party is a bigger barrier to socialism in this country than the Conservatives are. That's the truth of the matter. And until we can actually burn the Labour Party down, destroy it as an electoral force, we're not actually going to make the change that's actually needed. We'll just be tinkering. And we'll continue to see inequality growing, poverty growing, as happened under the last Labour government. Let's remember that. Services continued to be, public services continued to be privatised. People working ridiculously long hours. We saw tuition fees being introduced. We saw private healthcare being brought in to the national service by the Labour government. I mean, let's just remember that, So, it's not about the question of saying, well, look, it's either we either have the Tories or we have Labour and that will be better. Well, it won't be better. We've got to find a way. We've got to wean ourselves off the Labour Party and start again and build again. And I know it's difficult. not easy, but we can't just continually leave it to future generations. We need to make that start now. And it's possible to break the political duopoly. It's been done before in this country when Labour replaced the Liberals. And this, if I recommend people look at it, what Ian Hodgson has said from the Bakers Union, and one of the very early general secretaries of the Bakers Union helped to found the Labour Party. Very much talked in terms of the Liberal Party and the way in which the Labour Party is operating today. And the political duopoly has already been broken in Scotland. Labour's persona non grata now in Scotland. The SNP have replaced them. So it's not impossible. It's difficult in the first past the post system, but it's not impossible. And we absolutely have to do it, because keeping the Labour Party or the Tory party in is just a continuation of the neoliberal status quo. And if we're going to do anything serious about breaking that, we have to wean ourselves off voting for the Labour Party.
Thank you, Chris. We've got 2 minutes left. Last word to you, Tom.
It was just a quick thing. I'm not sure if we agree on this, Chris, but as I mentioned earlier, I think what the members of Resist have come up with as an initial manifesto is really something that clearly, when people look at it, can see helps people, helps ordinary people, workers and ordinary people and families, gives them healthcare, gives them rights, and creates a better society. I think that's really clear for anyone, with half a brain that's able to look at it. However, I just wanted to ask you what you think motivates people to vote, and because we all hope that people are motivated to hope through rational thought and through hope for a better society. But I put it to you that perhaps people are being taught now to vote through grievance, a sense of grievance. The right, and Trump in particular, have.
Can I jump in on that? Chris, you've got 30 seconds to answer this, Chris.
1 minute left. So, and people are very clearly seeing the corruption that's absolutely rampant in this current government. And I wonder whether Resist will focus somewhat on that, on making the electorate aware of that rampant corruption that's taking place.
We absolutely do need to do that. I think political grievance does have a place in politics, but we also need to be, giving people hope. But raising political consciousness, that's the key. If we can raise political consciousness, then I think we've got a fighting chance of actually making a breakthrough and making a real difference for people.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chris, for coming on the show today. Answered lots of questions, enlightened hopefully a lot of people when they watch this. Thank you, Tom. Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Speak to you both soon.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.